We also have Cambria York, the other co-editor of Socialist Education in Korea. Cambria York is a self-described recovering academic, a voice actor, folklore-inspired musician, theatrical technician, and tribal sovereignty advocate. She's the editor of Socialist Education in Korea, Selected Writings of Kim Il-sung. York's an organizer with the PSL, the Answer Coalition, and the Indianapolis Liberation Center, where she coordinates the People's Power Urban Farm in coalition with area mutual aid groups to combat food apartheid and environmental racism, and as a vehicle to educate her community and demand land reform for the people, not the banks. York was born and raised in central Gulf Coast subregion of the Deep South and left for the Midwest to pursue a master's degree in historical and cultural musicology, but quickly became disillusioned through the sheer amount of anti-communist, historical revisionist narratives, which continue to run roughshod over what anti-imperialist perspective exists still in music scholarship. It was this turning point which pushed York to continue her studies independently and internationally as part of the movement. York is a journeyman technician in her trade union, the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, and has been active in the performing arts, whether on stage or backstage, all of her life. As a voiceover artist, you can hear Cambria on the upcoming audiobook launch of Socialist Reconstruction, A Better Future for the United States, and on Liberation Audio on most streaming platforms, where she regularly contributes in recording articles published through Liberation School and Liberation News to provide greater accessibility and availability of geopolitical news, theory, and analysis from a working class, internationalist, and Leninist lens.
Thank you for having us. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. You'll have our utmost gratitude and thanks. And I'd like to begin. Kim Il-sung, in Theses on Socialist Education, wrote that compulsory education can only become a reality when it is free. The fundamental distinction between the compulsory education in socialist societies and the so-called compulsory education in capitalist society lies in the fact that education costs are borne by the socialist state, which actually provides the people with the right and freedom to study. And I just wanted to focus in on those two words, the right and freedom to study. And in the process of editing this selection, I was particularly taken by the verbiage of education being a right and a freedom guaranteed to the people. And in the US, and indeed the capitalist world writ large, we are bombarded with all kinds of talk about what alleged freedoms we have. But to paraphrase a particularly famous Georgian Marxist who requires no introduction, what freedom or liberty does a homeless, jobless person have in the capitalist world? Only when exploitation, oppression, unemployment, and abject poverty have been abolished can liberty, both personal and collective, exist in reality and not just on paper. Excuse me. This framework of not just adequate, but high-quality educational infrastructure being a human right is one that we as organizers share and practice. To build on what my comrade Riley said, national liberation, the socialist transformation of a society, and its development hinges upon the ability and capacity for massive, mobilized, and intensive education efforts. One that cannot be delivered via mandates, but one that's developed throughout society and based on meeting the needs of the people. Now, if you are a colonized person living in the US, there is a good probability that you live in the conditions comparable to a developing country, an internal colony, inside of a prison house of nations, following Lenin's definition of the term. Your schools are underfunded, they're staffed with police that don't even live in your community, and they put your children in debt to pay for their often malnutritious meals. Your water is poisoned due to contamination by a capitalist entity that violated the law either to extract resources or to avoid paying for maintenance. The hospitals in your community are understaffed and given little to no support, and you can't afford a single medical emergency. Your family might have various dietary needs, but the best that your public assistance can get you is government cheese. I could be talking about Okmulgee, Oklahoma on the Muskogee Res. I could be talking about Jackson, Mississippi. I could be talking about Central Valley, California. I could even be talking about my own neighborhood in Indianapolis, and my assessment would still apply. Much like how the ruling class throws us a bone through appointing people who look like you to positions of power that ultimately prove fruitless or whitewashes your own history to sell it back to you in a bid to take the fight out of you. Capitalist education exists and acts as the vehicle to instill the dead-end idea that this is the best there is. It is the only option left, and to demonize anyone who tries anything else. And you do not need eyes to see that that is a bald-faced lie. And this is because the US ruling class already sees its internal colonies as a fifth column, as the enemy, and over-polices them like an occupying army. And if you've seen the way that the ruling class talks about the workers' democracies of the world, Cuba, the PRC, the DPRK, Vietnam, Laos, etc., you don't have to guess how they feel about you. And so it's not enough to make revolutionary theory more accessible. It must be rigorously organized from the ground up. And this is the analogy I'm using. It must be like you are constructing a munitions factory, because ultimately you are arming others and you are arming yourself for the fight that is around you and the fight that is ahead of you. And I recently reread the Liberation School book, Revolutionary Education, Theory and Practice for Socialist Organizers, edited by Comrade Nino Brown of the PSL. And Marx and Engels said it best, I think, about presuming the competence of working people. By that I mean, despite the system setting each of us up for poverty and a lifetime of wage labor, we should assume by default that those we are organizing alongside have the capacity and potential for radically transforming their understanding of the world, their consciousness, political beliefs, and commitments. Knowledge will vary, of course, but knowledge does not equate intellect or skill. This presumption of competence is key for socialist pedagogy because, as Paulo Freire outlined in his critical works, a reciprocal and dialogic dynamic not only helps identify social contradictions and transform them, but equally as important, to utilize and develop the wealth of intellectual curiosity and creativity that is so often crushed in most people from a young age. Through building these kinds of relationships, be they mentor-mentee, facilitator-group, educator-student, or even peer-to-peer, we model to others the best attributes our class has to contribute in the building of a world worthy of human potential. And as you may know, my educational background is in music. I was fortunate enough to attend a university with a renowned expert on Kodály method as a tenured professor. She was educated in Budapest. And the Kodály method, developed by Zoltán Kodály, was a radical shift in music pedagogy. It utilized songs that working class students would identify with, folk songs in their own language. And it was not long before his method of music pedagogy was the dominant school of thought among music teachers in the Hungarian People's Republic. And so its principles were that music should be taught in a logical and sequential manner, that there should be pleasure in learning music, that both learning and teaching should be a pleasurable experience, not torturous, that the voice is the most accessible universal instrument that all humans have, that the musical material is taught in the context of the mother tongue folk song. All Kodály method style classes are never one-on-one. They're always taught collectively. And that has been the case since its inception. And so this method was so revolutionary for the time because Kodály correctly identified that engaging students on their level generally led to far more successful outcomes. I know, we know this to be the case now. It's a matter of course. But in addition, Kodály wholeheartedly rejected and noted that prior methods of pedagogy and teaching music relied very much heavily upon the idea that students were a blank canvas, the tabula rasa, for the instructor to fill with information. Now, that in turn did not take into account prior knowledge or context a student may bring to the classroom, and it further alienated the student from their own educational exchange. And the goal of the Kodály method, when taught completely and to its natural conclusion, is that the student should not only comprehend what they have been instructed, but that they have the fully realized ability to create music of their own and to understand it better. The same is true, I would argue, with explicitly political education and consciousness building. Now, I'm going to wrap up with one more quote. Marshal Kim Jong-il wrote in 1995 that even if a socialist society has been established and a firm economic and material foundations of socialism laid, people do not acquire a socialist ideology automatically. And that remains true to this day. Building a socialist consciousness is a delicate, often very protracted experience, and it's not linear whatsoever. But in involving ourselves fully in the development of our fellow workers, we are able to demonstrate the values of the new society we seek to build. And it is for this reason that the task laid before any revolutionary organization that seeks to build the party, to lead their people, is to actively equip our class to genuinely lead the transformation of society towards a future in where humanity has not merely survived the barbarism of imperialism and fascism and climate change, but one that has thrived in spite of everything. And this will only be accomplished by any means necessary. Thank you for your time.
I'm Michael Hudson. I'm appearing here for the International Manifesto Group. If you like this video and ones like it, please subscribe. For more information, go to the address on the screen.